They thought it was just another night to show off their wealth and charm. Another excuse to drown arrogance in champagne and neon light. Inside the Crystal Bay Hotel, the most exclusive gala of the season glittered with power. Every table shimmered under gold chandeliers, and laughter from Manhattan's richest heirs filled the hall. Ethan Marlowe owned that laughter. He was the kind of man who never heard the word no. Son of billionaire developer Richard Marlowe, Ethan floated through life like rules were furniture, something other people bumped into. Cameras loved him, tabloids adored him, and his friends orbited around his arrogance, feeding off his confidence the way moths feed off flame. Working the floor that night was Sophia Martinez. She wasn't supposed to be noticed. Waitresses at high-end galas were invisible by design. Smooth movements, polite smiles, always one step behind the celebration. For Sophia, the job meant security. Rent paid, medical bills handled. Another month closer to the small apartment she and her husband could finally call home. She was tired, but steady, weaving between tables with practiced grace. Her hands never shook, even when drunk guests barked orders or snapped fingers. But that night, as she set a tray of champagne on Ethan Marlowe's table, something small happened that changed everything. A single drop of wine splashed onto his cuff, barely visible, almost nothing. Sophia noticed first and reached for a napkin. "I'm so sorry, sir," Ethan cut her off with a lazy smile. "Do you know how much this suit costs?" His friends chuckled. She apologized again, offered to clean it. Ethan leaned back, eyes glinting. No, you're right. It's just a spot. Maybe we should make it match." Before she understood, he grabbed a can of Coca-Cola from the table's mixer bucket, popped it open, and upended it over her head. The liquid hissed and splattered across her uniform. Gasps followed, mixed with laughter. Phones rose in the air, recording every humiliating second. For a moment, time froze. Sophia stood motionless, drenched and trembling, sticky soda sliding down her neck. Her eyes darted toward the crowd, searching for any hint of compassion. None came. Richard Marlowe, sitting 2 tables away, didn't even flinch. He just sipped his drink and looked bored. Ethan laughed louder. "Guess we found the entertainment." Tears burned her eyes, but she forced herself not to cry. Crying would give them what they wanted. Instead, she whispered a shaky, "Excuse me," and turned away. Laughter followed her through the kitchen doors. In the cramped break room, she peeled off her soaked apron and stared at the floor. Her co-workers muttered curses under their breath. Furious, but powerless. The head waiter told her to go home, promised to handle it. She knew he wouldn't. Nobody challenged the Marlowes. Sophia wiped her face, took a deep breath, and told herself it was over. Tomorrow she'd wash the uniform, go back to work, pretend it never happened. What her husband didn't know wouldn't hurt anyone. Her husband, Dante. If the city's elite knew who he really was, they would have treated her like royalty. But Sophia thought of him simply as a contractor, a man who ran crews for high-rise projects, quiet, disciplined, devoted. She had no idea the contracts he signed stretched deep into New York's underground, that his real influence came from boardrooms and back alleys alike. That night, Dante was reviewing plans in his office when his phone buzzed. A kitchen worker from the gala, a man Dante once helped get out of trouble, had sent him a message. Just a link. He clicked it. The video played in silence, his wife standing there drenched in cola, surrounded by laughter. For a full minute he didn't move. His jaw tightened, breath slow, eyes fixed on the screen. When the clip ended, he replayed it. Then again, each time his expression grew colder. Across the desk lay blueprints for several major Marlowe Group projects, buildings that required materials, permits, and labor controlled by Dante's network. It took exactly 5 minutes for calculation to replace anger. He called no one. He just opened a notebook, wrote 7 dates down the margin, and closed it. Over the next few hours, quiet phone calls spread through the city's veins. Cement deliveries delayed due to supplier issues. Steel shipments held up by customs inspections. A few union heads received anonymous tips about violations on Marlowe Group sites. Bank analysts whispered about liquidity risks. Nothing dramatic, just friction, subtle and precise. Sophia, meanwhile, slept restlessly beside him, unaware the storm had already started. The next morning, Richard Marlowe's board meeting began with shouting. Their flagship skyscraper halted construction overnight. The port hadn't released the steel, the concrete mix never arrived, and a critical supplier declared unexpected backlog. Ethan scrolled social media under the table, seeing clips of his prank blowing up with laughing emojis. He smirked. By day 3, the Marlowe Group's stock dropped 5%. Analysts blamed supply chain issues, but Richard knew better. Too many coincidences, too perfectly timed. He called old contacts in City Hall, asking for favors, but doors that once opened easily now stayed shut. A banker friend whispered about quiet investors buying up Marlowe Group's corporate debt. Millions at a time, through shell accounts. At dinner, Richard snapped at his son. "What did you do last weekend?" Ethan shrugged. "Nothing. Why?" Richard slammed his tablet on the table. The viral video looped on the screen. "That's why." Ethan's face went pale. "It's just a joke. A joke that's costing me hundreds of millions." He stormed out, leaving Ethan staring at his reflection in the dark glass window, for the first time realizing his father's fear was real. Day 4. Construction sites across Manhattan slowed to a crawl. A quiet rumor circulated among subcontractors. Pay your crews, but stay home until further notice. Nobody wanted to cross whoever was pulling the strings. Sophia noticed the tension in Dante's shoulders at breakfast. "Rough week?" He smiled softly. "Just business." She reached over, touched his hand. "You work too hard," he kissed her forehead. "For you, it's never too hard." When she left for her shift, he watched from the window until her bus disappeared around the corner. Then he turned back to his desk, picked up the phone, and made one last call. "By tomorrow," he said. "They'll understand respect." On the 7th day, Richard Marlowe's empire was cracking. Projects frozen, lenders panicking, investors bailing. He spent the night in his office, staring at spreadsheets bleeding red. At dawn, a message arrived through his private line. "Meeting requested. Neutral ground. 8 p.m. tonight." No signature, but he didn't need one. He arrived early at the empty rooftop restaurant, found Dante waiting with a calm expression that carried more weight than any weapon. Richard didn't bother pretending confidence. "You're behind this," Dante didn't deny it. "Your son disrespected my wife," Richard's voice wavered. He didn't know who she was. "That's the problem," Dante said quietly. "He thinks it matters." Richard swallowed hard. "What do you want?" Dante's answer came measured, deliberate. "An apology, public, from both of you. 50 million to the Hospitality Workers Fund. 15% of your Hudson Tower stake transferred quietly. And your son. He disappears from public view. Forever." Richard stared. "You're destroying my life." "No," Dante replied. "I'm giving you a chance to rebuild it on something stronger." For a long moment, neither spoke. Below them, the city hummed. Traffic, sirens, life. Finally, Richard nodded. "You'll have it." Dante stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and left without another word. That night, while Sophia served tables unaware of anything beyond her tray, the Marlowes began drafting their statement. Within 24 hours, the apology aired across every major network. The footage showed Richard and Ethan standing side by side, voices trembling as they acknowledged their actions and pledged restitution. Viewers saw humility. Investors saw stability returning. Workers saw respect. Sophia watched the broadcast in the restaurant kitchen, stunned. "That's the man from the gala," she whispered. Her co-workers cheered. Justice, it seemed, had come from nowhere. She went home that night feeling lighter, never noticing the satisfied calm in her husband's eyes as he turned off the television. He never told her. He never would. To her, he was still the quiet man who fixed things. She'd never know he'd just reminded the city that the real power doesn't wear suits. It pours the concrete they stand on. Sophia woke up the next morning feeling lighter, though she didn't quite understand why. The apology video had gone viral overnight. Strangers on social media were calling her the girl who made billionaires kneel. She laughed at the irony. She hadn't done anything except endure. Still, the sympathy felt good. Tips doubled that week. Managers treated the staff with sudden respect, like everyone had remembered that waiters had names. At home, Dante moved through his days as if nothing had changed. He cooked breakfast, ironed his shirts, asked about her shifts. When Sophia thanked him for being supportive, he only smiled. You deserve peace, that's all. But peace wasn't exactly what followed. Behind polite headlines and quiet boardroom deals, Richard Marlowe's company was still bleeding. Dante's debt holdings gave him leverage over every project the Marlowes touched. He didn't intend to ruin them now. He intended to own them, the city whispered. Developers wondered why permits suddenly cleared faster for Dante's subsidiaries. Bankers noticed new shell firms appearing overnight with spotless credit. No one connected the dots. Yet, Ethan tried to vanish as promised. His father had shipped him off to a remote accounting branch upstate, far from cameras, friends, and nightlife. At first, he treated it like exile. Then the boredom began to dig under his skin. One night, scrolling through comments on the apology video, he saw messages calling him coward, spoiled trash, the cola prince. Each insult burned a little deeper, until anger replaced shame. He told himself he'd been set up. That mysterious man at the rooftop meeting had manipulated everything. He started to investigate. Meanwhile, Sophia received a letter at work. No return address, just her name in careful handwriting. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a note, for new beginnings, from someone who believes you deserve more. Her breath caught. She asked the manager if he knew where it came from. He didn't. Her first thought was gratitude. Her second was fear. Money like that always had strings. She hid the check in a drawer and tried to forget it. That night, Dante found her sitting by the window, letter still in her hand. "What's wrong?" he asked softly. She showed him the note. His face stayed neutral, unreadable. "Maybe someone who saw the video," he said. "You touched people. Or maybe it's pity." He took her hand. "Does it matter? You earned respect. Keep it." She smiled faintly, kissed his cheek, and decided to deposit it. Over the next few weeks, little miracles kept happening. Her brother's medical bills were cleared by an anonymous donor. Her workplace received a sudden grant for staff training. Everything she cared about began to bloom. She told herself the world was finally being kind. Dante watched from the background, never correcting her. Across the city, Richard Marlowe was learning to live differently too. The public apology had saved his reputation, but left his empire vulnerable. Investors demanded transparency. Partners asked for proof of reform. For the first time, he felt something like humility. One evening, he requested another meeting with Dante. They met in a quiet church downtown, away from bodyguards and luxury. Richard looked older, thinner. "You got what you wanted," he said. "Why are you still holding my debt?" Dante clasped his hands. "Because power borrowed is power learned. Keep paying interest. It'll remind you who builds your towers." Richard exhaled slowly. "You're not like other men in your world." "I'm exactly like them," Dante replied. "I just remember who they step on." For a long time, neither spoke. Then Richard said, "I'll rebuild differently. Maybe that's what you wanted." "Maybe." Dante stood. "Or maybe I wanted you to understand that foundation is everything." Outside, the night air felt heavier. Richard realized he wasn't just dealing with vengeance. He was part of someone's lesson plan. Back in upstate New York, Ethan's investigation led him to an old contact in the permits office. After a few drinks, the man admitted that every recent holdup traced back to anonymous tips, signed under a contractor name, D. Martelli Construction. Ethan searched the name. The company belonged to a man named Dante Martinez. The surname struck him first. Martinez. He pulled up the gala footage again, pausing on Sophia's face. The truth landed like a punch. The waitress he humiliated was the wife of the man who now controlled their entire future. Shock turned into rage. He started making calls, looking for leverage, anything to expose Dante. But Dante had built his empire too carefully. Every trail looped back to legitimate businesses, every deal covered by lawyers who owed him favors. Ethan grew obsessed. He stopped showing up at work, stopped sleeping, started drinking. He told himself that if he could just reveal the connection, he'd redeem himself, prove to his father he wasn't useless. One night, he broke into his father's old office downtown, searching for anything linking the Marlowes to the shell companies buying their debt. Instead, he found a folder labeled Settlement Terms. Inside were contracts, signed transfers, the 15% tower stake, the charity receipt. At the back, a single photo. Dante and Richard shaking hands on the rooftop. Ethan stared at it until his hands shook. "You made a deal with him?" he whispered into the empty room. "You sold me out." For the first time, he realized he wasn't angry at Dante. He was angry at his father for treating him as expendable. He tore the photo in half, pocketed the piece with Dante's face, and made a decision that would undo everything both men had built. Back home, Sophia sensed something changing in Dante. He came home later, phone always buzzing, eyes distant. She assumed it was work stress. He'd smile, tell her he was fine, and hold her close until she believed it. But inside, he knew the peace he'd created was fragile. Retaliation breeds ripples, and ripples always find a shore. Ethan's shore arrived one morning in the form of a journalist. He sent the reporter copies of every file, every rumor, every unverified theory that linked Dante Martinez to organized influence in construction. He told himself he was doing the right thing, exposing corruption, protecting his family's name. In truth, it was revenge. The story exploded online within hours. Mystery benefactor behind worker rights crusade tied to underground networks. The photo of Dante's handshake with Richard led every thumbnail. Comment sections divided. Some called Dante a hero of justice, others a dangerous manipulator hiding behind charity. Sophia saw the headline during lunch break and nearly dropped her phone. The man in the photo looked like her husband, younger maybe, but unmistakable. Her hands trembled as she called him. "Dante, what is this?" He paused. "Come home. We'll talk." When she arrived, he was waiting by the window again. Same calm posture, same quiet eyes. "I wanted to protect you from that world," he said. "But I can't hide it anymore." "You're saying it's true?" "I control what I have to control. It keeps us safe." She stepped back. "Safe? You lied to me." "I lied to everyone," he said softly. "Because truth doesn't change danger." Tears welled in her eyes. "You destroyed them for me. I defended you," he corrected. "The city just happened to learn respect in the process." She looked away, torn between fear and gratitude. "And now? Now we wait to see if they've learned enough." Outside, reporters gathered like vultures around the Marlowe headquarters. Richard tried to hold a press conference, denying underworld ties, blaming rogue contractors. But Ethan couldn't stay silent. He showed up uninvited, shouting about the rooftop meeting, about how his father had sold our souls to a criminal. Cameras turned instantly. Within minutes, father and son were screaming at each other live on air. It was chaos, raw, humiliating, public. Sophia watched from home, heart pounding. "What have we done?" she whispered. Dante turned off the TV. "We? No, Sophia. They." But he knew it wasn't that simple anymore. The fallout from the broadcast hit the city like a shockwave. Sophia watched the chaos unfold on every screen. News anchors dissecting the scandal, investors speculating, politicians distancing themselves from the Marlowes. Dante remained calm, always 2 moves ahead, while the world tried to piece together the truth. But this time, his silence wasn't about anger. It was about precision. He'd learned long ago that public opinion moves faster than any weapon. If you control the narrative, you control everything. Behind closed doors, Richard Marlowe fought to keep his empire from collapsing. Banks froze lines of credit. Partners withdrew. Even allies who once boasted of his name now avoided his calls. His son's outburst had fractured what was left of their reputation. Dante saw opportunity in chaos. Instead of pushing harder, he did something unexpected. He offered help. Through one of his subsidiaries, he sent a formal proposal to the Marlowe board. A restructuring plan that would keep projects alive, preserve jobs, and inject capital through ethical investment channels. In exchange, his company would gain partial oversight of Marlowe Group's community development programs. To the public, it looked like a savior's move. The same man accused of manipulating the system was now trying to fix it. Sophia couldn't believe what she was seeing. "You're helping them?" she asked one night, eyes filled with confusion. Dante nodded. "Sometimes rebuilding teaches more than destroying ever could." "But they humiliated me." They already destroyed themselves, he said quietly. Now they'll spend their future learning why respect matters. The plan worked. The media turned. Headlines shifted from scandal to recovery. Richard became the face of reform, pledging transparency and workplace dignity. The city applauded the transformation, never realizing whose influence guided it all from behind the curtain. Meanwhile, Ethan watched everything unravel from a distance. His father had taken control of the company again, but without him. He sent an email one night, a short message filled with bitterness. "You won, but one day the truth will surface." Dante never replied. Instead, he focused on Sophia. With the crisis fading, she opened her own cafe. Small, sunlit, filled with the warmth she'd always shared with others. Customers loved her energy, her kindness. To them, she was just another small business owner chasing a dream. To Dante, she was the heart of everything he'd built. Months passed. The city stabilized. Construction resumed. The skyline began to rise again. And for the first time, those who worked on the ground felt valued. Sophia's story had started a quiet movement. Workers across the industry spoke up, demanding better treatment. The Marlows funded initiatives for fairness and safety. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One afternoon, Sophia stood on her cafe's balcony, looking out at a new tower under construction. The banner read, Marlow Foundation plus Martelli Group Partnership. She smiled. "Feels like the city finally changed." Dante joined her, coffee in hand. "Maybe it just remembered who really builds it." She looked at him. "You did this, didn't you?" He hesitated. "We both did." In that moment, she understood. He hadn't sought revenge. He'd rewritten the rules. The skyline of the city looked brighter than ever. But behind the glass towers, ghosts of past mistakes lingered. Richard Marlowe stood in his penthouse office long after the lights of the city had dimmed. His reflection stared back at him, not as the proud developer who once ruled Manhattan's skyline, but as a man learning what it meant to lose everything and still stand. The world outside praised him for his redemption, for his renewed commitment to fairness, for rebuilding a company on respect rather than arrogance. Yet every headline that called him reformed only reminded him how much of that transformation he owed to someone else. He poured a glass of water, stared at the ice melting, and whispered to himself, "He didn't destroy me. He rebuilt me." Dante Martelli's name was never mentioned in those articles. He preferred it that way. While the city debated the Marlowe redemption arc, Dante was focused on the workers, the foundations, the quiet corners where lives actually changed. His influence rippled invisibly through every construction site, every boardroom conversation, every decision where decency suddenly mattered. He never demanded credit, only progress. But deep down, Richard knew. Every meeting, every investor, every new partnership bore the invisible seal of Martelli's restraint. The man he once considered beneath his circle had become the architect of his survival. Weeks turned into months. Marlowe Group stabilized, the scandal faded, and a cautious calm settled over the city. Yet something inside Richard wouldn't rest. He couldn't shake the feeling that his success now belonged to someone else's mercy. Pride, once his armor, had become his burden. He needed to face the man who had rewritten his fate. When he requested a private meeting, Dante didn't refuse. They met at sunset in an unfinished skyscraper overlooking the river, a project that symbolized both of their legacies. The concrete floors were bare, the wind humming through steel beams, the skyline painted in gold and shadow. Richard broke the silence first. "I owe you an apology, and maybe more than that." Dante said nothing, his eyes tracing the horizon. "I thought power meant control," Richard continued, voice trembling slightly. "But you showed me it's about responsibility. I didn't understand that until I lost it all." Dante finally turned to him. "You didn't lose it, Richard. You just saw who really holds it." For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of distant traffic filled the space between them. Richard sighed. "Why didn't you ruin me completely? You had every reason." "Because that would have made me like you used to be," Dante replied. "Breaking someone doesn't fix the system. Changing it does," Richard nodded slowly. "Then tell me, what do I do now?" "Start with people," Dante said simply. "Build from the bottom up. Let every worker, every voice matter. Power built on fear collapses. Power built on respect endures. It wasn't a threat. It was a blueprint. That night, something shifted in Richard Marlowe. For the first time, he didn't see Dante as a rival, but as a mirror. A reminder of what he could have been if greed hadn't clouded his vision. Over the following weeks, Richard began to act differently. He visited construction sites unannounced, not to inspect, but to listen. He shook hands with foremen, thanked servers at company events, and personally funded safety upgrades. The tabloids called it the Marlowe Reform, painting him as a man reborn. Only a few insiders knew who had lit that spark. Meanwhile, Sophia's cafe had become a quiet landmark. People came not just for coffee, but for connection. Workers in dusty uniforms, executives in tailored suits, students and artists all shared the same small tables, breathing the same air of humanity. She didn't know the full truth behind the Marlowe partnership, but she felt the ripple effect every day. Customers told her about new company policies, fairer treatment, bonuses for overtime. All changes inspired by the scandal that had once broken her. Sometimes, she'd glance at the TV on the wall showing business news, smiling at how different the world looked now. She didn't need to know every name behind it. She could feel the difference in people's faces. Dante visited the cafe often, always quiet, always humble. They'd sit together in the corner booth as the city moved outside their window. She once asked him, "Do you ever think about that night?" He nodded. "Every day, but not with anger anymore." "What then?" "With purpose." She smiled softly. "I guess we both found that." Their conversations became moments of peace. Two people who'd seen how cruelty could turn into change when guided by compassion. In time, the Marlowe Foundation announced a citywide program for service workers, scholarships, mental health care, and workplace training. Richard stood before a crowd, announcing it proudly. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, and somewhere in the back, unseen, Dante listened. When Richard spoke, his voice carried something new. "Power isn't about what we own," he said, "but about what we uplift." The audience applauded. He looked toward the back of the room, as if searching for someone. He didn't find him, but he smiled anyway. Dante left quietly before the event ended. He didn't need recognition. His justice wasn't about spotlight. It was about structure. Later that night, as the city lights reflected off the river, Sophia and Dante walked home in silence. The streets were peaceful, the air warm. She linked her arm through his and said, "You know, when they poured that drink on me, I thought the world would never change. But it did." He looked at her, gentle but firm. "The world only changes when someone refuses to let it stay cruel." She laughed softly. "You're getting good at those quotes." "Maybe I've been listening to you too long." They paused near a bridge, watching cranes move slowly against the moonlit skyline. She whispered, "So what now?" He smiled. "Now we build, not for revenge, not for power, for people." As dawn began to color the sky, Dante thought about the city, a place once ruled by ego, now breathing a little easier. Justice hadn't come from destruction. It had come from design. The world had moved on, but the lesson stayed. The truest victories are the quiet ones, the ones that rewrite hearts, not headlines. The skyline shimmered like a heartbeat, pulsing with stories of redemption. The city had moved on from the chaos that once defined it, but deep down, everyone knew something fundamental had shifted. Where arrogance once ruled, accountability had taken root. Where power used to silence, compassion now spoke louder. Sofia Martinez stepped out of her cafe early that morning. The sun was still low, gilding the glass towers in rose gold. She wiped her hands on her apron and smiled at the first construction workers lining up for their usual coffee. They joked, laughed, traded stories, and every one of them treated her with warmth. That, she thought, was the real miracle. Not the downfall of the powerful, but the awakening of the ordinary. Her cafe had become a landmark of sorts. Bloggers called it the place that rebuilt the city's soul. Tourists came to take photos. Documentaries called it the cup that changed everything. But Sophia didn't see herself as a symbol. She was just someone who refused to let humiliation define her. She chose kindness, even when the world had been cruel. Inside, a framed newspaper clipping hung quietly near the counter. Marlowe Foundation and Martelli Group partner to fund worker dignity program. Every time Sophia looked at it, she remembered that moment when Dante had told her, "Sometimes, rebuilding teaches more than destroying ever could." It wasn't just a line, it had become a blueprint for the city's new identity. Across the river, Dante Martelli watched from the terrace of an unmarked office building. His empire had grown, not through fear or manipulation, but through integrity. For years he had operated in the shadows, pulling strings no one saw. But now he worked in the open. His companies were transparent, ethical, respected. He didn't crave credit, he only wanted results. He'd learned that the most lasting influence isn't carved in stone or broadcast in headlines. It's whispered in boardrooms, written into policies, felt in the quiet dignity of everyday work. Every project his company now led followed 3 simple rules: fair pay, safe conditions, shared credit. What had begun as a silent mission of restitution had evolved into a movement. Other firms copied it. Media outlets named it the new code of the city. And yet, Dante stayed invisible. When reporters tried to interview him, his representatives politely declined. "Our focus," they would say, "is on foundations, not faces." Richard Marlowe, on the other hand, was everywhere. His redemption story fascinated the public. Talk shows invited him, universities asked him to speak, and he used every platform to advocate for worker respect. People were skeptical at first, but over time his sincerity became undeniable. He donated millions, sponsored urban renewal programs, and made a point of hiring from within the communities he had once overlooked. But privately, Richard carried a quiet debt. Not financial, moral. He often wondered if Dante would ever forgive him, or if forgiveness was even the right word. Dante hadn't punished him. He'd given him purpose. That was something money could never repay. One night, after a gala celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Worker Dignity Fund, Richard slipped away from the applause and stepped onto the balcony. The city stretched before him like a living organism glittering with progress. He thought about the man who had started this chain reaction. Then his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. 10 years, still holding strong. "The foundation stands," Richard smiled. No signature. He didn't need one. Back at her cafe, Sophia closed shop for the evening. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the streets pulsed with energy. Food carts, laughter, the hum of construction continuing into the night. The skyline was still rising, reshaped by new values. She thought about the girl she used to be. Tired, invisible, drenched in shame. And she thought about the woman she had become. Proud, calm, respected. The world hadn't just changed around her. It had changed because of her courage to keep going. Later that week, she was invited to give a talk at a leadership summit. The audience was full of executives and workers alike. She took the stage, nervous at first, then found her rhythm. "I used to think dignity was something someone could take from you," she said. "But dignity isn't granted, it's lived. And when one person chooses to stand for it, others follow." The crowd rose to its feet. Cameras flashed. Clips of her speech went viral overnight. Dante watched from his office, a faint smile crossing his face. He didn't need applause. Her words were enough. Every sentence she spoke carried the weight of what they'd both learned. Justice doesn't have to roar. Sometimes it whispers, and the world listens. In the months that followed, the ripple grew. Cities across the country adopted similar programs. Companies restructured their ethics codes. Even global media began to reference the new Manhattan model of fair development. For the first time in decades, people believed the system could change from within. Sophia's cafe expanded into 2 more locations, each staffed by former hospitality workers who'd once struggled for recognition. She called the new branch Horizon Grounds, named after the tower that had started it all. At the grand opening, a journalist asked her if she had any advice for people facing unfairness. She thought for a moment and said, "Don't waste your energy on revenge. Build something better instead." That line became a viral quote overnight, shared millions of times. Dante read it on a billboard a week later and laughed quietly to himself. She always did have the best words, he murmured. As time went on, Richard Marlowe retired from corporate life, dedicating his wealth to education and labor reform. Before stepping down, he recorded a final message for his employees. "We once built towers for profit. Now we build them for people. Remember that balance. It's the only legacy that lasts." When the recording played publicly, it trended for days. Commentators called it the speech that closed an era. Years later, a young reporter doing a retrospective on the city's transformation tracked down Sophia for an interview. She was older now, her hair streaked with silver, but her energy was unchanged. "Do you ever wonder what happened to Dante Martelli?" the reporter asked. She smiled. "No need to wonder. He's everywhere," the reporter frowned. "Everywhere?" She pointed out the window toward the skyline. "Every policy that protects a worker, every tower that honors its builders, every cafe that treats its staff like family, that's him." "That's us," the young journalist smiled, realizing the meaning. "So his story never ended." Sophia shook her head. "Stories like his don't end. They just change form." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the towers, a quiet montage would play. Workers sharing meals, families laughing in parks built from former construction sites, new buildings breaking ground with ceremonies honoring the crews first. The city, once divided by class and ego, now thrived on cooperation. A voiceover rose over the music, measured but firm. "Power isn't about who stands tallest. It's about who holds others up." The final shot drifted to the skyline, glowing in the twilight. The Horizon Tower stood in the center, its mirrored glass catching the last rays of sunlight. At its base, the engraved line gleamed faintly. "For those who build with heart." The screen would fade to black as the final line delivered the ultimate message. Real strength doesn't destroy. It designs. And the truest foundations aren't made of concrete. They're made of character. A moment of silence follows. Not emptiness, but peace. Then the closing call to action. If this story moved you, don't just watch it. Share it. Build something better. Because legacies aren't written in stone. They're written in how we treat each other,